If you ask anyone from the Golden Age era of Hollywood why everyone was so obsessed with Marlon Brando, you will most likely be shocked at how colorful his life was, because he had such a serious demeanor, but was a really down-to-earth guy full of scandal and mystery. Brando was known for his tumultuous personal life and his large number of partners and children. He was the father to at least 11 children, 3 of whom were adopted. During his day, if I could compare him to someone or compare someone to him, I would say a Brad Pitt in his peak era. And all the ladies loved him, and he had a lot of ladies and gentlemen as well, as we will see in this video. We are going to talk about his alleged relationship with comic Richard Pryor, and we are going to talk about some of his statements that were very, very controversial. And I must say that these are his statements, not mine, so don't come to me in the comments, okay? I'm just reporting on his life. And we are going to talk about some of his famous lovers, who they are. But first, I do want to let you guys know a little bit about who Marlon Brando was, what was his accomplishments, a couple of his favorite things, his activism, as well as his childhood, okay? Marlon Brando was a legendary American actor, widely recognized as one of the most influential actors in the history of Hollywood. He was known for his impeccable acting skills and his role in some of the most iconic films of all time. His charisma, charm, and talent have earned him numerous awards, accolades, and a place in the hearts of people all around the world. He won his first Academy Award for his role in On the Waterfront in 1954, and then again in 1973 for The Godfather. In addition to this, Brando was also nominated for Oscars for his roles in Julius Caesar, Sayonara, and A Streetcar Named Desire. If you are familiar with his films, comment below your favorite. I really loved him in A Streetcar Named Desire, and of course, The Godfather. Come on, it's going to be everybody's favorite movie, right? His performance in The Godfather is widely regarded as one of the best in cinematic history. He also starred in Apocalypse Now and The Last Tango in Paris, which showcases versatility as an actor. Brando didn't just make a name for himself in Hollywood, he also starred in foreign films such as Burn and Queimada. Brando's magnetic presence on the screen translated across borders, which solidified his status as a global icon. Marlon Brando was a symbol of the golden age of Hollywood. He was part of a group of actors that included James Dean, which I did a video for, Montgomery Clift, and Paul Newman, who are on my list, don't worry, who revolutionized acting as we know it today. Brando paved the way for actors to come and help shape the entertainment industry into what it is today. Brando's involvement in the civil rights movement began long before King's death. He gave thousands of dollars to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and a scholarship fund established for the children of assassinated Mississippi NAACP leader Medgar Evers in the early 1960s. Brando was jailed in 1964 at a fish-in to protest a broken treaty that promised Native Americans fishing rights in Puget Sound. By this time, Brando had previously been involved in films with human rights messages such as Sayonara, which dealt with interracial romance, and The Ugly American, which depicted the actions of U.S. officials abroad and its negative impact on foreign residents. He also donated money to the Black Panther Party for a period and considered himself a buddy of founder Bobby Seale. He also delivered a eulogy when Bobby Hutton was killed by police. In the aftermath of the 1968 death and murder of Martin Luther King Jr., Brando made one of the strongest commitments to furthering King's work. Shortly after King's death, he announced that he was bowing out of the lead role of a major film, which was The Arrangement, which was about to begin production in order to devote himself to the civil rights movement, saying, "I felt I'd better go find out where it is, what it is to be Black in this country, what's this rage is all about," Brando said on the late-night ABC TV talk show Joey Bishop Show. In an A&E biography episode on Brando, actor and co-star Martin Sheen states, and I quote, "I'll never forget the night that Reverend King was shot, and I turned on the news and Marlon was walking through Harlem with Mayor Lindsay, and there were snipers and there were a lot of unrest, and he kept walking and talking through those neighborhoods with Mayor Lindsay. It was one of the most incredible acts of courage I ever saw, and it meant a lot and did a lot," end quote.
Painfully sensitive to the political upheaval sweeping America in the 1960s.
Actors have always been shills and quacks, and maybe it's a cynical attitude, but the fact is that it will make people pause long enough to consider whether it is right or wrong that a Negro should vote.
Marlon's political progressivism can be traced to his mother, his lifelong sympathy for the underdog, for Black folks, Indians, children. Marlon was always a soft touch for a kid, particularly a poor kid. This all goes back to Dodie Brando.
Following his mother's example, Brando had been an active Democrat since the 1940s. 2 decades later, he channeled the passion he once held for acting into civil rights.
Marlon had been in the civil rights struggle before Dr. King showed up.
Yes.
At the March on Washington, the Lincoln Memorial, there was Marlon, and on so many other occasions.
He did walk with Martin Luther King. I mean, that was something very important to him.
We're all going to talk about civil rights, word to go on the television and say what we know.
I'll never forget the night that Reverend King was shot. And I turned on the news, and Marlon was walking through Harlem with Mayor Lindsay, and there were snipers, and there was a lot of unrest. And he kept walking and talking through those neighborhoods with Mayor Lindsay. It was one of the most incredible acts of courage I ever saw, and it meant a lot, and it did a lot.
Brando was also a supporter of Native American rights in the American Indian movement. The March 1964 fish-in demonstration near Tacoma, Washington, where he was jailed while protesting for fishing treaty rights, earned him admiration from members of the Puyallup tribe, who reportedly dubbed the place where he was arrested Brando's Landing. Brando refused to receive his Oscar for his career-reviving performance in The Godfather at the 1973 Academy Award presentation. Sacheen Littlefeather represented him at the event instead. She attended in full Apache regalia and declared that she would not take the award because of the poor treatment of Native Americans in the film industry, end quote.
In 1970, rising young director Francis Ford Coppola was on the hunt for a major star for his film of novelist Mario Puzo's bestseller, The Godfather. On the set, Brando was relaxed, funny, and supportive of his admiring co-stars, including Al Pacino, James Caan, and Robert Duvall.
He had the great good fortune to get one of the real parts in the history of American film, a terrific director, perfect for the project, a stellar supporting cast, most of whom were so overjoyed to be working with him because they felt he had been the actor they had modeled themselves on. Therefore, they were perfect to play his family.
Brando actually appeared in less than half of the film, but his presence dominated every frame. When The Godfather opened in 1972, Brando amazed his harshest critics and gave his loyal fans reason to rejoice. His performance as Don Corleone was hailed as one of the most subtle and powerful in the history of film. The next year, it earned him a second Academy Award for Best Actor. But this time, Brando refused to play Hollywood's game. In his place, he sent an American Indian activist he'd recently met. Born Maria Cruz, she was also known as Sacheen Littlefeather.
I had this speech in my hand, and Howard Koch came up, who is the executive producer of the show, and he told me that if I dare read that speech, that he would have me arrested and that I only had 60 seconds to accept that award, and that was it.
Hello, I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening, and he has asked me to tell you in a very long speech, which I cannot share with you presently because of time, but I will be glad to share with the press afterwards, that he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award. And the reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry.
Hollywood hated him for that. Well, first of all, they were giving him the award even though he'd sort of turned against movies. And then he sends up an Indian girl to say he doesn't want it. It was a slap in the face. Everybody was appalled. Thought it was kind of funny.
Outside of his film work, Brando appeared before the California Assembly in support of a fair housing law and personally joined picket lines in demonstration protesting discrimination in housing developments in 1963. And this is just a few of the things he's done. He's done a lot more, but you guys will be bored if I just went on to list. But because of his childhood, which you guys will see, where he suffered a lot in his childhood, he was very much pro equal rights for everyone, and there was a lot of things he was against in Hollywood, and he was one of those people that put his money where his mouth was and speaking up about these things even when it was very uncomfortable and he faced a lot of backlash. But some people say maybe he took it a little too far when he spoke against Golda and the mayor.
Hollywood is run by Jews. It's owned by Jews. They should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering.
In April 1996, Brando had an interview with Larry King live, and it was pretty heated. I'll read the transcript for you guys. For copyright reasons, I can only play a little bit of the clip, okay? So Brando starts by saying, "I think that I'm very angry with some of the Jews." And Larry King asked him, "At some of the Jews?" And he responded, "Sam Goldwyn and all the rest of them, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Hollywood is run by Jews. Hollywood is run by Jews. It's owned by Jews, and they should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering. We've seen the Negro in Greaseball. We've seen the chink, we've seen the slit-eyed, deadly Jap, we've seen the sly Filipino, we've seen everything, every stereotype, but we've never seen the kike, which I didn't know what that was, but apparently it's a stereotype of Jews. So he was saying they put out every stereotype of everyone else, but you'll never see on film a stereotype of a Jew. Now back to what he was saying, because they were well aware that this is where you draw the wagons, end quote. So Larry King cut him off saying, when you say something like that, you're playing right into the people who say the Jews are. And then Brando interrupted him because, Larry King is a Jew himself. And Brando said, no, because I will be the first one to appraise the Jews, honestly, and say thank God for them. And he went on to credit how most of the art that we have, music and culture, came from the Jews, and that he was very grateful for, Hollywood, basically, which gave a lot of people opportunities, but he was just calling out specifically the stereotyping and how none of them stood against that when during the golden age of era, if you look at the history of it, just on a historical standpoint, it was founded by Jews. So he said they, at that time, were basically running everything, even though a lot of the stars would protest about some of the stereotypes in film and say, hey, something must be done about this. This is why he didn't get his Oscar or anything. They never really said anything. During that time, those in Hollywood, I want to be clear, that's what Brando was saying. And a lot of stars that did come up to defend him were saying that, well, how come they didn't speak against these stereotypes during that day and what Brando said, but they mostly focused on, instead they made Brando apologize for even speaking up about the stereotypes in the films. He had to apologize for that, but no one apologized for the stereotypes that have been portrayed on film in Hollywood through all these years. How come there was no apology issued for that from the people he was directly calling out that were alive during those days? And he continued by saying, they don't anger me. That's the nature of human beings. That is the nature of human beings. He repeated himself a lot. I'm sorry, guys. So I'll repeat the same thing a lot. He said, I would like that they were more sensitive. And through the years, I think we've gained a certain sensitivity here in Hollywood. Here in Hollywood, we have not sensitized so that we can't treat blacks that way because blacks are not going to stand for it. These people, if you see these people down in front of the federal building, the brown people, they are not going to stand for it, end quote. Basically, he was saying now it was becoming, because he was much older now when he was speaking to Larry King, he was saying there's a lot of progress because now there's a lot of these stereotypes these people are no longer allowing. But he was also stating to these groups of people that you guys got to start gatekeeping and defending yourself like every other group that does a good job of defending and protecting themselves, because if you don't want it, they can't play it, hurt their pockets, they won't do it. That's basically what he was saying, because other groups will protect themselves as they should, as they rightfully should, So he was saying to the brown people, to the Indians, and to the African American, protect yourselves as well. Don't stand for it. Don't watch the films. Don't pay for it. Call it out. Everybody boycott or speak out against it, which was a bold move to do. But after a commercial break, Larry came back on, and I guess they must have talked to Brando, and he agreed to, hey, I'm going to apologize for it, but he backtracked. So Larry King said, we're back with Marlon Brando. He does want to clear up that his criticism of Jewish people who are in position of power in Hollywood. And Brando cut him off and said, no, I don't want to clear it up. No, I think, and then King interrupted him saying, you don't want people to think that you're, and then Brando said, no, the Jews they understand, they know perfectly well what their responsibilities are. And more you see among younger Jews a sense, we wouldn't have the extraordinary films that come out of Hollywood that are so sensitive, really. He said, these are the old time Jews that run Hollywood. I think more and more that you see that. However, all those old films like John Wayne and Charlton Heston and all of those Indian killers they killed, they did more harm to the American Indians than Custer did. Then Larry King said, they didn't know though, did they? And Brando said, no, they knew very well, end quote. So he, of course, suffered a lot of backlash from a lot of people. So his agent came out and defended him. His agent, producer, and friend Kay Kentar defended him in Daily Variety, saying, Marlon has spoken to me for hours about his fondness for the Jewish people, and he is a well-known supporter of Israel. Kentar was also a devout Jew himself, so he defended his friend. And he also had some other Jewish friends that did come out. He did go speak with Jewish leaders that did come out and defend him afterwards. And I was like, hey, he came, he spoke to us. We understand where he was coming from. He apologized. So it's not a big issue. And Marlon was able to work again.
Earlier this week, actor Marlon Brando met with Jewish leaders to apologize for comments he made on Larry King Live. Among them that, quote, Hollywood is run by Jews. The Jewish leaders accepted the actor's apology and announced that Brando is now free to work again.
Comment below your thoughts below with that, but that was a big old thing I saw when I was researching that I never knew about. So I'm interested to see your thoughts and what are your opinions about that. And as I stated, these are his views. Now, a few fun facts before we get into his childhood. Brando was such a close friend of the late entertainer Michael Jackson, whom I did a breakdown video for also, that he frequently spent weeks at Jackson's Neverland Ranch. Brando also starred in the singer's 13-minute music video for You Rock My World and attended the singer's 2-day concert celebration of his solo career's 30th anniversary. The actor's son, Miko, was Jackson's bodyguard and assistant for several years and was a friend of the singer. And this is what he said about his dad on his last days with Michael Jackson. He said, "The last time my father left his house to go to anywhere to spend any kind of time, it was with Michael Jackson," Miko stated. "He loved it. He had a 24-hour chef, 24-hour security, 24-hour help, 24-hour kitchen, 24-hour maid service. Michael was instrumental helping my father through the last few years of his life. For that, I will always be indebted to him. Dad had a hard time breathing in his final days and he was on oxygen much of the time. He loved the outdoors, so Michael would invite him over to Neverland. Dad could name all the trees there and the flowers, but being on oxygen, it was hard for him to get around and see them all. It's such a big place, so Michael got Dad a golf cart with a portable oxygen tank so he could go around and enjoy Neverland. They'd just drive around, Michael Jackson, Marlon Brando with an oxygen tank and a golf cart," end quote.
One of the few people Brando enjoyed spending time with was another reclusive celebrity, Michael Jackson. The singer had become a friend in the 1980s after Marlon gave the king of pop acting lessons.
Michael opened up his house to him, and he had his own room. He had a 24-hour chef, 24-hour maid service, 24-hour security. He had carte blanche. He treated him really nice.
There's a lot of stories of Michael Jackson doing things like that for his friends, taking care of them on their last days, making sure they were good, having them over his house. I did a video for him too. Now let's talk about his binge eating before we get to his child, because that was another fun fact about him, is that he had an eating problem, especially in his later days, and it was a real problem. I'm talking about fighting people to get to the food, okay? So these stories are crazy. Close friend Carlo Fiore wrote that in the 50s and early 60s, Brando went on crash diets before his films started shooting. But when he lost his willpower, he would eat huge breakfasts, which was cornflakes, sausages, eggs, bananas, and cream, and a huge stack of pancakes drenched in syrup in one sitting. Fiore was detailed by producers to drag him out of coffee shops. Carl Malden claimed that during the shooting of One-Eyed Jack, Brando would have 2 steak potatoes, 2 apple pies a la mode, and a cart of milk for dinner, which made a lot of the costume designers for his movies feel frustrated because they would often have to redo his costumes because he would grow weight or they'd have to, stretch him out. His second wife, Movita, who had a lock put on their refrigerator, she thought maybe the household staff was stealing all our food at night, so she put a lock on it. But when she woke up one morning to find that the lock was broken and a teeth mark was on the cheese, she was shocked. And the maid told her that Brando came and every night he raided the fridge. "It's not us, we're not stealing your food," but she just couldn't believe that her husband was eating that much. So Movita also related how he often drove down to hot dog stands late at night. One of his favorite spots was the legendary Pink's Hot Dogs in Hollywood. It was open 24 hours a day, and Brando would go there at 3 or 4 in the morning and polish off a half dozen hot dogs at a time. Mutiny on the Bounty, the costume designer James Taylor claimed that Brando split the seat, split his pants in the middle on 52 pairs of pants during the shooting of the film, which required them to have stretch fabric be sewn into his replacements, but even then he would rip those too. So Dick Loving, who was married to Brando's sister Franny, said that Brando used to eat 2 chickens at a sitting, like a whole chicken, and go through bags of Pepperidge Farm cookies. Wow. By the 1980s, there were reports that one of his girlfriends had left him because he failed to keep his promise of losing weight. He seemed to be dieting, but to her astonishment, he never lost weight. She found out that his buddies had been throwing bags of Burger King Whoppers over the gate of his home late at night to relieve the hunger pangs of their hungry friend. In the late 80s, Brando was spotted regularly buying ice cream from a Beverly Hills ice cream shop, 5 gallons at a time. He supposedly confessed that he was eating it all himself. Finally, a reported Brando snack was a pound of cooked bacon shoved into an entire loaf of bread. And when Brando became ill, he seriously cut back and lost 70 pounds on a bland diet, but never lost his love of food and especially ice cream.
Marlon was a self-educated person. He never finished high school. He felt inferior that he had not gone to college, that he was not thought of as an intellectual, that he was not credited with making some kind of palpable contribution to the betterment of human life.
Brando's unhappiness was reflected by his size.
Marlon ate in order to disfigure himself. Marlon used putting on weight as an expression of self-contempt and self-destruction. You cannot be a matinee idol if you weigh 300 pounds.
He insisted that the refrigerator be padlocked. He couldn't unlock it. But the next day, I would come to work and notice that there were empty ice cream cartons, wrappers for Big Macs. He would call the local McDonald's, have somebody drive up to the property and toss the stuff over the fence.
One of our conversations about, he said, it's an addiction. It's like drugs or booze. Eating's an addiction. Sometimes he'd go on these absolutely ascetic diets. He'd eat with chopsticks, just bits of greens and stuff. And that was as comical to me as, because I knew after I left, he'd be down at Ralph's in the ice cream department.
But even at 300 pounds, Marlon Brando was still a charismatic figure, one who had no trouble finding female companionship.
He was involved with Yacho Tsubaki, a very lovely Japanese lady, and that ended when she discovered that Christina, the maid, was pregnant. One day, Marlon asked me to find a house for him. So I said, well, how big a house? Oh, maybe 3-4 bedrooms, nice house. About that moment, Christina walks in, about 8 months pregnant. And I looked at Christina, and I looked at Marlon, and I said, oh, now I know why you need that house.
Marlon Brando's countless affairs over 4 decades had produced 10 children, amid rumors of more. He was usually an absentee father, but he did attempt to protect their privacy.
He was pretty tall, too, and had a wider frame, so he carried his weight well, so I guess that's why he kept eating. But, yeah, it was from doing movies when you were younger where your body was ripped, so you could eat everything, but then when you stopped making those movies, you continue with the same diet. But he loved food. Comment below your thoughts with that. Now, let's talk about his childhood. Marlon Brando Jr. was a Hollywood legend known for his innovative acting techniques and smoldering good looks. But before he became a movie star, he was just a kid from Nebraska with a troubled childhood and a hunger for something more. Marlon Brando Jr. was born on April 3rd, 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska, to Marlon Brando Sr. and Dorothy Pennebaker. Both his parents were alcoholics, and Brando watched as they suffered with their addictions, and he was very angry and bitter by it. His parents separated when he was young, and his mother took him and his sister to California before reconciling with his father and moving to Illinois. Marlon was a rebellious kid, known for misbehaving and struggling in school. He excelled at sports and drama, but failed in every other subject, causing him to be held back a year and eventually expelled. Growing up, Marlon felt like a complete failure. He never seemed to be able to impress his father, no matter how hard he tried. He enjoyed telling me, and this is a quote from him, he said he enjoyed telling me I couldn't do anything right. He used to tell me that I'd never amount to anything, but Brando's intense contempt of his father simply stoked his inner fire. Marlon's father sent him to Shattuck Military Academy, hoping the strict discipline would straighten him out. Marlon continued to excel at acting, but his rebellious nature got him into trouble once again, resulting in him being expelled from the prestigious school because he was pulling pranks on them. But his classmates loved him and was like, no, don't expel him. They were trying to fight for him not to be expelled, but he was expelled.
He was born in America's heartland, in Omaha, Nebraska, on April 3rd, 1924. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a successful traveling salesman. His mother, Dodie, was a gifted amateur actress at the local Omaha Playhouse. In 1938, Marlon moved with his parents and 2 sisters to a rented farmhouse in Libertyville, Illinois. But behind the facade of a happy American household was a family torn apart by alcohol and violence.
Marlon Brando Sr. was a drinker and a wife batterer. Dodie was an alcoholic. Marlon would take her home from bars, and he literally would take her home when she was very drunk and nurse her back to health.
He told me on different occasions she might be passing out or in a toxic state. He learned to imitate the animals on the farm, and then neighbors and friends to awaken her, to get her to pay attention to him. That was the beginning of his acting. It's also one of the reasons acting was painful in a lot of ways.
I think he adored his mother. She'd always been in love with the theater. I think that's where that came from. His father was rather a handsome man, overbearing man.
Marlon truly hated his father for what he perceived as the betrayal of the beloved mother. The mother several times attempted to commit suicide. It is said, and Marlon's father was slapping the mother around, and Marlon came to his mother's defense by running upstairs and grabbing his dad's .45 out of the dresser and coming down and supposedly putting the gun up to the old man's temple and said, you do that once more, and I'm going to kill you.
He went to the same military school as his father and was thrown out. He felt that he wasn't worthy, wasn't liked, wasn't good. He always felt very dear about his mother. He was there in the hospital when she died, and he told me what a sacred and solemn moment that was.
I think the effect of his mother's death was profound. She was the one who could give him approval like no one else could. And after his mother died, it seems that Marlon stops caring.
The actor was increasingly torn by his contempt for Hollywood and the pleasure he took in the power of his fame.
He hated it and loved it both. On the one hand, being a celebrity allowed Marlon to take his revenge on the world that had so deeply hurt him, so deeply scarred him. On the other hand, he hated it because he knew it was false and ephemeral.
Brando formed his own production company. To run it, he surprised many by hiring the man he claimed to hate most, his own father, who was now living off Marlon's wealth.
It was complicated because his father was the nominal president of the production company. It was called Pennybaker because that was his mother's maiden name. It gave Marlon a chance to take shots at him, to demean and diminish him. But yet, when Marlon would come into the studio, he'd begin by giving his father a hug. But inside were very, very tempestuous feelings about his father.
It was a grievance that Brando carried on into adult life and beyond the death of the father. And I think he fed off it and fueled off it. Marlon said after the father was dead, he wished he was still alive so he could beat him up.
Unable to enlist in the army due to a knee injury, Marlon found himself working as a ditch digger during the summer, but he had bigger dreams. Marlon decided to follow his sister to New York City, where he studied acting at the American Theater Wing Professional School. It was the first time he heard good things about himself, and he quickly fell in love with the craft of acting. Marlon's family and friends described him as a sensitive and emotional kid with a wild streak that often got him into trouble. He struggled with feeling abandoned by his mother and found solace in his family's housekeeper, who eventually, unfortunately, had to get married, and he felt so betrayed, like he had nobody else when the housekeeper left. And his mom was an actress also, but she did like bit parts. Marlon was a curious kid, always eager to learn and explore. He loved to read, and his childhood friends remember him as a loyal and fun companion. Now let's get into his career, how he got his start. After a stint in New York studying with the legendary acting coach Stella Adler, Marlon moved to Hollywood in the early 1950s, hoping to break into the film industry. He auditioned for several studios, but most of them rejected him because of his unconventional looks and acting style. However, one studio saw something special in him and gave him a chance to shine. That studio was none other than MGM. In 1950, Marlon made his film debut in a small but pivotal role in the war drama The Men. The critics were divided about Marlon's performance. Some praised his naturalism and intensity, while others dismissed him as an oddity, a mumbler, a method actor who relied too much on his own emotions and ignored the script and the director. But some said it's because he dropped out of school. He probably didn't know how to read that well, so he would just improvise, which would be a nice trick if you ask me. Nevertheless, Marlon's presence on the screen was undeniable, and the camera loved him. He was gorgeous, and he had already gained a reputation as an actor to watch. But Marlon's road to fame was not easy, nor did it happen immediately. In fact, after The Men, Marlon was offered only minor and stereotypical roles, such as Mexican bandits, where they would even give him a mustache and color his face darker, stuff that just disgusted him and turned him off. He also played New York punks like the bad kid or an Indian chief. He felt frustrated and disillusioned and began to question his choices of a Hollywood career. However, Marlon was a stubborn and determined person who believed in himself and his abilities, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. He started to read and research the characters and setting of his films and to experiment with his acting techniques. He also became involved in social and political causes such as the civil rights, anti-war, and environmental activism that gave him a deeper understanding of the human condition and the world around him. He was so against war that before he became a star, they was trying to recruit him to go, I think it was to the Korean War. I'm not too sure, don't quote me on it, but they was trying to recruit him, and he botched the application, like where he had to fill out for his mental stability, and he said he had a mental illness. So when they asked him what he identified as, he said an oyster. So he just was avoiding war of all, and he did not believe in, sending out the youth because they were like 18 to just go die, for another man's war. First, in 1951, Marlon teamed up with director Elia Kazan to make A Streetcar Named Desire, which was really good, based on Tennessee Williams' play of the same name. Marlon's performance was electrifying, mesmerizing, and controversial. It was a really good movie, as he brought out the primal and vulnerable aspects of Stanley's personality and challenged the norms of masculinity and sensuality at that time. The film not only made Marlon a household name, but also won him his first Oscar nomination for Best Actor. It also established the so-called method acting acting style, which relied on immersive research, emotional memory, and physical transformation, in which Marlon had learned from Stella Adler and other mentors. And so while they were making fun of him for being a method actor, he officially made it like a thing, and more directors started allowing the artist, the actor, to improvise more, to speak from the heart, the emotion, and being that. The method, which was a radical departure from the classical and theatrical acting of the past, soon became a trend in a school of thought in Hollywood and beyond, and influenced generations of actors from James Dean, which I did a video for too, De Niro, which is on my list, and DiCaprio, all on my list. However, it also had its critics who accused it of being self-indulgent, pretentious, and disturbing, as some actors went to extreme lengths to stay in character, such as gaining or losing weight, sleeping on the streets, or inhaling substances. While Marlon Brando continued to explore the method in his further films such as Viva Zapata, Julius Caesar, which was amazing, and On the Waterfront, for which he won his first Oscar for Best Actor, he also faced some setbacks and controversy. Where he played a rebellious biker, Marlon's character inspired a wave of juvenile delinquency. He started putting on weight in his early 20s, and by the early to mid-1990s, he was over 300 pounds and had type 2 diabetes. He was also known for being a pain on set, as he would forget his lines and challenge the film directors with bizarre requests instead of learning them. Brando claimed in songs My Mother Taught Me, which is his autobiography, which is a really good read, that he and Marilyn Monroe had an affair and remained in touch occasionally for many years, and that he received a phone call from her several days before her death. He also said Marilyn was a very intelligent and had social awareness and a very bright, woman, and that he loved having conversations with her, that it was beyond just the beauty, the aesthetics of it. She was actually a really sweet soul. And we get into some of these things in my video, just how deep Marilyn actually was in some of her poems. So check out that video if you haven't seen it also. And then he had Rita Moreno at the same time, which I just did a video for, I believe, last week. So check that out. She went through it. I went more in depth on their relationship, so I'm just going to give y'all a quick version here so you can check it out in the Rita Moreno video where I go more in depth because she went through it. In 1954, Brando started dating actress Rita Moreno when Moreno fell pregnant by Brando. Moreno tried to take her own life by taking too many of Brando's sleeping medications after the failed, attempt. But Moreno did, lose the baby. She was always around throughout his first wives. She was just always around in the background, okay? She went through it. So you guys check that video out.
Brando's magnetism also made him one of the busiest bachelors in Hollywood. His romantic escapades became instant legend. Marlon's affairs reportedly ran into the hundreds and included such actresses as Rita Moreno, Shelley Winters, and Marilyn Monroe.
Sex was a big thing in Marlon's life. It was mood, music, lighting.
The things about Marlon Brando, it's in the public record, a very wounded person.
Yes, he was a very damaged person.
Yeah.
And I wasn't exactly unwounded either. And, these two obsessives came together and just exploded. We were really addicted to each other. And addictions are very, very difficult to get rid of. Very.
It was an 8-year relationship. He married 2 other women in the course of that relationship, fathered children with them.
Yep.
What was it that made you stay?
I loved him. It's obsessive love, which is a whole nother thing. I mean, we need another half hour for that one.
But
with the presence of a psychiatrist, well, I don't think Marlon ever got to trust women. I don't know enough about Elvis, really, to make any kind of supposition. But I know that Marlon was a horribly damaged person by the time I met him. His mother was an alcoholic. His father drank. And, she disappointed him constantly over and over and over. So he kept either punishing women for having the capacity to do that to men, and he kept punishing himself by finding women who were very often not reliable. Interesting, yes?
And yes, indeed. And tragic in the sense that it even drove you to attempt to...
It did. It was my way, twisted and sick as it was, to try to end that kind of humiliation and pain. I just didn't know how else to do it because I kept going back to him.
So Brando met French actress Josiane Mariani, then 19, in 1954, and they became briefly engaged. When Brando found out that his other girlfriend, because he had multiple at one time, Anna Cashapp, was pregnant, he called off the engagement and eventually married her instead. Brando and Cashapp had a son, Christian, on May 11th, 1958, and they divorced in 1959.
Marlon's unhappiness manifested itself in his growing weight. He began to eat compulsively.
He began to be a kind of food addict as opposed to being an alcoholic. Both of his parents were alcoholics. I think he became a food addict.
Brando's personal life was drifting into chaos, but Marlon thought he'd found an emotional anchor after meeting a raven-haired, aspiring actress named Anna Kashfi.
She's wearing an Indian sari, and she said she was a pure-blooded Indian, and he fell madly in love with her.
She was the Brando woman personified. Dark-skinned, voluptuous, young, kind of a dazzling smile. And when he went over to meet her, he was at his romantic best.
In 1957, when Anna became pregnant, Brando impulsively agreed to marriage.
He said, of course, we'll have to get married, you know. And then, of course, into the marriage, it was hectic. It was really bad. He was seeing other people, men included.
Marlon was also infuriated when he learned that Anna was not Indian, but a girl born in Wales, Great Britain, who grew up in India. By the time their son, Christian Brando, was born in 1958, Marlon had left the marriage.
Christian, certainly grew up in a chaotic home life situation. Anna was drinking a lot. She also had a seizure disorder and was taking anticonvulsants while pregnant. And Marlon simply pulled out of there. He was not there as a father.
And in 1960, Brando married Castaneda, a Mexican-American actress. The marriage was annulled in 1968 after it was discovered her previous marriage was still active, but they did have 2 children together, which is Miko, who just spoke earlier on Michael Jackson and his dad's friendship, and Rebecca Brando.
Christian Brando's birth only intensified Marlon and Anna's battles, which ended in divorce court and a bitter custody battle over their son. At the same time, Brando was turning up the heat on another romance, this time with Movida Castaneda, a Mexican-born actress 7 years his senior, who'd appeared with Clark Gable in the 1935 film Mutiny on the Bounty. Although Brando was seeing other women, Marlon agreed to marry Movida in 1960, after she became pregnant.
Movida stood up to him, and he was intrigued by that. Sexually, she supposedly was very, very much there. She liked to hang out with the guys. She wasn't a coquette. She wasn't a starlet. She wasn't a wannabe. She was up front, and Marlon liked that. On the other hand, that marriage did not, although it produced 2 children, did not survive, basically because Marlon was out screwing his brains out.
Brando would be an absentee father in most of his children's lives, but he did enjoy an affectionate relationship with his first child with Movida, Miko Brando.
He always told me, be yourself, be honest, be happy. And, but he gave good advice. Manners was very important to him. Even though we had housekeepers, he'd always ask us to still make our beds, still have respect for her, say thank you, clean up the dishes, do our chores. Just because we had a housekeeper didn't mean that we're meant to be slops. And always say thank you. There was times when we would go out to dinner with the family, and if one of us did not say thank you to the waiter, he would tell the waiter to take back the food until we said thank you.
Now, French actress Teresa Pryor, who played Brando's love interest in Mutiny on the Bounty, became his 3rd wife on August 10, 1962. She was 20 years old, 18 years younger than Brando, who was reportedly delighted by her naivete because Terry Pryor was a native French speaker.
There's no greater testament to Marlon's interest in dark-skinned women than he married the 2 women that played Maimiti in the original version of Mutiny on the Bounty and in his version. Teresa was his leading lady, and he found it very appealing.
But Mutiny on the Bounty also brought Marlon an unexpected measure of peace. The actor later purchased the Tahitian island of Tetiaroa and began a common-law union with Teresa Taripea. Their relationship produced a son, Teotu, and a daughter, Teresa Zumi Cheyenne.
I think he had a very romantic image of the purity of native peoples. He looked upon South Sea Island as a sort of dream people. He was very drawn to women of color. A native, a person with some deep contact with the earth, the sea, nature.
This island was escape from all of his problems. He really wanted to live there forever. He wanted to create an Eden for himself and for his friends, and he tried to do that.
Brando became fluent in the language and gave numerous interviews in French. Brando and Taripaya had 2 children together. And let's talk about his housekeeper. Brando had a long-term relationship with his housekeeper, Maria Cristina, with whom he had 3 children. There were persistent whispers that Brando had a close relationship with actor Wally Cox, who was often seen by his side.
In 1943, Manhattan was teeming with playwrights, actors, left-wing activists, and thousands of available women. All were drawn to the dynamic and slightly dangerous Marlon Brando.
He had great acuity about assessing people and disliked cliches. He didn't want to be conventional.
Pushing boundaries in every direction, the 19-year-old also had countless love affairs, reportedly with both women and men. But he allowed few people to get close to him. One exception was a childhood friend from Illinois, who'd also moved to Manhattan to be an actor. His name was Wally Cox.
They were an unlikely couple as far as friends are concerned. Wally was very, seemingly very frail, and Marlon was quite the opposite. But they had a relationship that was very deeply rooted. And I think it may have come from the fact that they both had very troubled relationships with their parents.
During one interview, Brando said of their friendship that if Wally had been a woman, I would have married him and would have lived happily ever after. Brando was crushed by the sudden death of Wally Cox, only 48 years old. He showed up abruptly at the funeral and stole the ashes, much to the dismay of Cox's wife. It was alleged that Brando even slept in the pajamas of his deceased friend.
And sense of isolation grew in 1973 with the death of his oldest friend, Wally Cox, at the age of 48.
Brando was just devastated. He came to the funeral. He climbed up a tree and looked down on everybody. He got the ashes away from Wally Cox's wife, the box of ashes, and they literally fought over the ashes, and Brando was stronger, so he was able to get the boxes of ashes away from Mrs. Cox, and he kept them first in his car and then by his bed, and he talked to the ashes, and finally, Mrs. Cox was going to sue for the ashes, but she finally said, I think Marlon needs the ashes more than I do.
Of course, it wasn't just Cox who was the subject of speculation. Brando was also linked to comedian Richard Pryor, with whom he allegedly had a brief romance. The two met on the set of the film The Wild One and hit it off immediately. Brando was said to be quite taken with Pryor, with Richard Pryor's quick wit and irreverent sense of humor, and the two began an affair that lasted for a period of time.
Marlon Brando would sleep with anybody. He slept with Richard Pryor. We actually got in touch with Richard Pryor's widow, Jennifer Pryor.
She confirmed everything and then more, Charles, and it was kind of surprising how open she was, but she said Richard had no shame in this either, and he was actually he also kind of said that, you know what, it was the 70s, that's when the still good, a lot of Quaaludes were going around at these parties, and these guys were artists, so they were more than willing to experiment with different things, and she said he'd be laughing if he heard that report came out today.
In a bombshell revelation that has the celebrity world buzzing, Jennifer Pryor, the widow of the iconic comedian Richard Pryor, has spilled the beans on her late husband's wild escapades during the 1970s. It's the Hollywood crossover that no one saw coming, but now it's making waves like never before. And guess who had spilled the tea about this shocking liaison long before Jennifer decided to lift the veil? None other than music mogul Quincy Jones. In a sensational twist, Jennifer confirmed the veracity of Quincy Jones's claims that Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando had a passionate fling. However, there have been contradictions to these claims. Days after Jennifer spilled the tea on Pryor's love life, Rain, the daughter of Pryor and his second wife, Shelley Bonus, denied the alleged affair, posting an impassioned post about her father on Facebook, slamming both Jones and Pryor's widow as bottom feeders. All you who touted faux news and preach about wanting blacks to be represented in a great light and then posted Q's interview are irrelevant and full of your own BS, Rain wrote. Q was once a brilliant music producer who is losing his mind and decided to garner publicity for himself with a sensationalized interview. And because y'all think and equate fame and money with decency, you ate it up like thirsty dogs as he spewed out a lie about my father who's not here to defend himself. Then on top of it all, my dad's so-called widow validated it because she needs to keep legitimizing herself and tarnish our dad even after he's dead, Rain continued. He even had a fling with a drag queen who apparently could give Josephine Baker a run for her money in the glamour department. The plot thickens when you realize that Pryor's she turned out to be a he. Can you believe it? Pryor himself spilled the beans in his autobiography, confessing, I discovered that she was actually a he. For some reason, I didn't care. But after 2 weeks of being gay, I went back to life as a heterosexual. Brando, the man who practically defined charisma, was unabashedly open about his bisexuality. In a jaw-dropping interview with a French journalist in '76, he casually dropped the bombshell that homosexuality was all the rage and hardly newsworthy anymore. As if that wasn't enough to set tongues wagging, he slyly added, like a large number of men, I too have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed. I have never paid much attention to what people think about me. But the icing on the cake? His nonchalant reaction to rumors linking him with the legendary Jack Nicholson. With a wink and a smirk, Brando brushed it off, saying, if there is someone who is convinced that Jack Nicholson and I are lovers, may they continue to do so. I find it amusing.
Quincy Jones' interview was fantastic. He did it with Vulture. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Where to begin? He says the Beatles suck, he knows who killed Kennedy, and that Brando hooked up with everyone. Marvin Gaye, James Baldwin, and Richard Pryor.
What's interesting about all of this is that Brando never really denied any of it. In fact, he seemed to revel in the rumors and speculation surrounding his personal life. He once famously said in an interview that he had, those tendencies and that he was open to anything. There's no doubt that he had close relationships with other men, but whether those relationships were purely platonic or something more remains a mystery. Brando died on July 1st, 2004 from respiratory and heart difficulties. He left behind 14 children and at least 30 grandchildren. Towards the end of his life, he suffered from failing eyesight caused by diabetes and also liver cancer. It was his voice, eerily enough, that remained,
Brando's health quickly worsened, and by June of 2004, the 80-year-old realized that the end was near. In a private ceremony, Brando's ashes were scattered in Death Valley and in Tahiti, along with those of his old friend Wally Cox, whose ashes Marlon kept for over 30 years.
So may he rest in peace, but he lived quite the controversial life. There was even this thing with his children. One of them, shot the husband of the sister. It was a whole big deal.
When it came to his oldest son, Christian, Marlon had always had a stormy relationship. For 18 years, Christian had been shuttled between his warring parents. By the 1980s, he seemed intimidated by his father and resentful of Marlon's fame. Christian himself was a would-be actor, although he mostly seemed interested in women. Guns.
You get in a certain habit and there's a pattern. It's like cigarette smoking or, sex, whatever.
Brando also worried about Christian's half-sister, Cheyenne, whose erratic emotional state seemed to worsen after a 1989 car accident.
Cheyenne was beautiful. She was vivacious and appealing, sort of mysterious. Something in some deep pool inside that you get pulled into. But her behavior became more and more eccentric, and there were these attempts. But he devoted himself to her, spent a lot of his year solely with her. He didn't know what to do, but neither did anybody else.
In 1990, Marlon learned that his emotionally unstable daughter was pregnant. The father-to-be was Dag Drolet, son of one of Marlon's oldest friends from Tahiti.
He was very worried about her because of her relationship with Dag Drolet, and there was no question that drugs were involved in this, and she was under the influence quite often.
Christian, desperate to please his father, make points with his father, took Marlon's instructions to, quote, find out about the relationship between your sister and Drolet as something more than just grilling him about what are your intentions, young man.
On the night of May 16th, 1990, Christian angrily confronted Dag Drolet with a loaded .45 in the living room of Marlon's home. Shots were fired, and minutes later, Beverly Hills police received a telephone call from Marlon Brando. He told them that his daughter's boyfriend, Dag Drolet, had been fatally shot. 2 days later, Christian Brando was charged with first-degree murder.
He was absolutely devastated by what happened to his son, but by the same token, he stood by his son and got him the best legal advice, and he was always there for him.
It is the position of the district attorney's office that Christian Brando is a definite flight risk.
Sometimes in life, you have to duke it out. And that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to duke it out.
In 1991, Christian Brando pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. 1 month later, his emotionally drained father took the stand in his son's defense.
I know that people accused him of acting. He wasn't.
Christian Brando was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Marlon Brando was consumed by guilt, but even worse was to come. On Easter Sunday, 1995, Cheyenne Brando committed in Tahiti by hanging herself. She was 25 years old. Her father was too grief-stricken to attend her funeral.
The grotesqueness of it is that, she was this ravishingly beautiful young woman. But at the time, she was hugely fat, like her father. He was just overwhelmed with guilt and grief.
Marlon became even more reclusive. We were sitting outside, and I tried to cheer him up or something, and he just wasn't going to be cheered up. He says, yeah, it's a great day. He says, my daughter has killed herself. My son is in prison, and the father of my only grandchild has been killed. I believe he was a loving father. He was very concerned about all of his kids. I guess he always felt that he had created his own demons there.
But his life, they need to do a biopic on it. They need to, because he had a lot going on. But comment below, what was the most shocking thing that you know about him? And again, what's your favorite movie? Thumbs up. And if you like the music you're listening to, the link is in the description. Until next time, I love you guys.